Hi, I'm Mary Schooling. I'm an Associate Professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Hong Kong. And I'm going to talk about one of my latest papers. Ever since I started in public health, I've been motivated by the questions that have the greatest effect on health. And so I've been motivated by the question as to why men have shorter lives than women. And one of the main causes of death where men have higher rates than women is heart disease. So I've wanted to know, what is it that makes men more vulnerable? The other thing is that the patterns of heart disease have changed massively over time. So that in the West there was a big increase in heart disease until about the 1960s and 70s, and then it's been falling. But we don't know whether the same thing is likely to happen in China. But what we do see is that men have more heart disease than women all the time. So that was my initial question. And then in Hong Kong, what I was looking at was using studies about migrants, because these studies are very useful in understanding influences over people's lives, what's really affected their health, because we can compare people who lived in different conditions. And particularly in Hong Kong, we can compare people who grew up in Hong Kong, which was relatively wealthy, compared with people who grew up in China, which was less so. And in doing that, what became obvious to me was that men who grew up in China had lower risk of heart disease than men who grew up in Hong Kong. But this wasn't the case for women. So it's something specifically about growing up in a more plentiful environment, which wasn't good for men's risk of heart disease. And then I thought about this from a biological perspective. And I remembered that we're not here to live forever. Our biological purpose is to get our genes into the next generation. So what we have to do is we have to survive, and then we have to procreate. And in order to procreate, we want to be, the most sexually attractive being possible. And one of the ways you can do that is to have higher levels of hormones. Women have high levels of the female hormone estrogen, they'll be more attractive. If men have high levels of the male hormone testosterone, they will be more attractive. So it would seem if you live in a richer environment, you would spend that extra wealth, as it were, on making yourself more attractive with higher levels of hormones. So that led me to the idea that higher levels of testosterone in specifically men could be what was causing their heart disease, higher rates than women, and higher rates with economic development. And then I've spent the next 10 years really testing that idea. But immediately I had problems, because in fact when you just correlate testosterone and health, you find that men with lower levels of testosterone are more likely to be ill. But I realized the problem was that it's ill health that reduces your testosterone rather than testosterone causing ill health, or that could be the explanation. So that's why I've done different sorts of studies, of which this one today is one of them. And in these studies I've looked at the relation between genetically determined testosterone. So I've compared men who genetically had slightly higher testosterone with men who had lower levels of testosterone, to see how that affected their cardiovascular risk profile. And so it turned out that men with genetically higher testosterone had a worse lipid profile, so they had more cholesterol, which is not good. And then also in this particular study we looked at the relation between genetically determined testosterone and heart function. And what we found was that men who had higher testosterone had longer QT interval, which is an indicator of a greater risk of heart disease. So that was again another piece of evidence that in fact higher testosterone is not good for cardiovascular disease and could be relevant to men's risk. And so having done all this work, done other studies indicating that if you give men testosterone, it actually increases their risk of cardiovascular disease. Despite the other evidence, in March this year, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States put out a warning saying, yes, testosterone does cause cardiovascular disease. And so what that means is that having started this 10 years ago with this just an idea from migration and biology, we've ended up now in having discovered a brand new risk factor for cardiovascular disease, which is testosterone in men. But the really important thing is that now we've got some other target to change to reduce men's risk. Not necessarily testosterone, but other exposures which affect testosterone you could then have as targets of intervention. So for example, things like green leafy vegetables might be good for you because they may reduce testosterone, but that's the next sort of question that we're going to be looking at.
My name is Dr. Ryan Ouyang. I'm the postdoctoral fellow of the School of Public Health, the University of Hong Kong. I have been working on a lot of projects with my supervisor, Dr. Mary Schooling. So in this particular project, we are interested in looking at whether testosterone affects cardiovascular health, for example, QT interval or heart rate. So we used a method called Mendelian randomization analysis to answer the research question. So this Mendelian randomization analysis involves two stages. So for the first stage, we recruited adult men in the University of Hong Kong to generate a genetic prediction rule of testosterone, which will be the first stage of the analysis. So in that particular project, we recruited young men and we asked them to come in the morning to provide blood samples. So from these blood samples, we obtained their genotype information as well as the testosterone level, which were done by our collaborators in the University of Hong Kong as well as our collaborators in Queen Mary Hospital. So from this information, we obtained the genetic prediction rule for testosterone, which were used in the subsequent analysis, which was the second stage of the analysis.
Hi, I'm Zhao from the School of Public Health. I'm in my final year of PhD study. My supervisor is Dr. Mary Schooling. My topic is testosterone and non-communicable chronic disease. Here, using my supervisor's study design and the samples collected from my colleague Yuan, we established this genetic prediction rule for serum testosterone and then applied this prediction rule in a larger sample of older Chinese men in the Guangzhou Biobank Cohort Study. And we found that testosterone is not associated with QT interval or heart rate. Instead, it is associated with longer corrected QT interval and higher heart rate. This is consistent with Health Canada's warning on CVD risk of testosterone.